Okay. Good morning, everybody. I just heard Carl whisper, there you go. I think that means go. Good morning. Some of you may know that I've been teaching a class in nonviolent communication, a la Marshall B. Rosenberg, at Clouds and Water. And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about speech. And I want to start by saying that when I was practicing at Great Vow Monastery, probably sometime in the first of the 3 years that I was there, one day Chosen Roshi sat me down and looked me straight in the eye and said, "You really, really, really need to practice with your speech." She said, it's a central problem for you. She said, you'll need to practice with it for the rest of your life. So this is a practice that's near and dear to me. And part of what I understood when she spoke to me about it, because it wasn't the first time. No, there'd be things like she would say, or Hogan Roshi would say, they'd remind me that my voice should not be louder than everybody else's when I was chanting. They reminded me that my seniors, all of whom were, except for the two coabits, I was the next oldest person, and they were in their 60s. I was in my late 50s, and everybody else was pretty much somewhere in their 30s or younger. So my seniors were in my 30s or younger. So she chose an opportunity to say to me during a meal, "Kyoku, please don't speak until everybody else who is senior to you has not spoken." So she had been trying to help me understand how much of an issue my speech was. So I've labeled my speech today in honor of all of her noble efforts and the fact that I still consider it a central practice for myself. How do I practice right speech? Now, the first thing that comes to me is right speech is more complicated than just speech. Right speech is just not between, is not contained simply by the words that come out of my mouth in the hearing of another person. So part of what I realized I needed to work on was speaking less, listening more, remembering and realizing that I was not separate and that my speech wasn't just between me and another person, that as with all things, every word that came out of my mouth, every thought that was articulated in speech was being shared with the entire universe forever and affecting how the karma of the whole universe evolved. And of course, in that process, I also have been working with my self-speech. So our inner thoughts are very much a form of speech. So I realized really, I stopped when I was preparing this talk, and I thought to myself, well, let me just count on my fingers how many of the practices that I think of as practice are involved in right speech. And as you may suspect, it's pretty much all of them. So, but the ones that I really, really come to me when I'm practicing really fall under what's normally labeled the 7 factors of enlightenment, some of which are also part of the divine abodes. So I just thought I'd read off all the things that I became aware of as I was preparing this talk that were involved. So first and foremost, of course, mindfulness. So staying aware of the body, mind, and the moment. That's one of my daily, momentarily, that's a practice that I really try to return to constantly during the day. Investigation is mindfulness, is a factor of enlightenment. So clearly seeing the details in the moment, I consider this part of the first noble truth, where we are asked by the Buddha to fully penetrate to the bottom of suffering. So that helps me remember that I need to always be engaged in the process and be very grateful for my delusions. If I don't encounter some of the suffering effects of not wise or thoughtful or kind speech, then pretty much it passes me by. So the making of mistakes feels sometimes like I'm really getting yanked at my own, sort of intentional collar to stop and consider the impact that I might be having in any given moment, and at the same time exercise the factor of enlightenment of being equanimous. So being able to stay present enough of the time without jumping off a cliff or kind of turning my own suffering back on myself by making it about myself again. It's like, it's not about the impact, but how bad I feel about the impact. So it's really been a powerful practice to keep my seat and not jump off of any cliff or bring it back to the self, but to really try to stay in that space of simply being part of the universe. Well, actually being the universe, which sometimes is more of a sentence than a reality. But the concentration on that sensitivity really helps to boost my mindfulness and boost my investigation. The third factor of enlightenment is energy. So when I apply myself to this presence so that I can see what's happening as it's happening, and I'm present to it in a way that's equanimous, by applying myself to that, I'm doing that with my intention in hand, as well as applying myself to what's coming out of my mouth or what story I have going in my mind. Joy is one of the factors of enlightenment. And this may not sound like a very joyful process so far, but I would have to say the application that I've managed to hang in there with has been a great joy. Because I connect with people in ways, and every now and then somebody will surprise me with their words and appreciation. And I'm kind of working towards, if I can, having as many of those moments and being there mindfully for them and not brushing them off, but being present. I have had an experience in, of all places, corporate America, sitting in a circle where each person became the star of the circle temporarily, and each other work colleague was expressing an appreciation for some aspect of me or what I'd said or what I'd done. And really, for all of us, it was a very intimate moment and a very intimate experience to be sitting with people that went all the way up to the executive BP level and a level at the bank I was working in, and seeing how we all kind of squirmed to just sit there and receive genuine, kind, thoughtful, funny appreciation for what we'd said and done and who we were. The fifth factor of enlightenment is tranquility, which is different from concentration or equanimity. So I got some help from the internet in discerning that, or differentiating that. So tranquility, it says, comes from confidence gained in prior activities. And that I have found to be extremely helpful in, and actually, I read about it and I thought, is that really happening? And I thought, yes, actually, one of the things is it gives me courage to stay present for my mistakes and to not waste them. So particularly if I have a one that's really hard, a conversation or an experience that's very hard and that's bothering me, that tranquility helps me, because I need relief and I hope it's going to do some good. And I now have enough experience to know that, yes, one of the tests I asked myself for was when I came back after 3 years at Great Vow. I asked people that I'd been practicing with for about 10 years before I went into that monastery, well, that place of practice. They're not really monks there, so they don't call themselves a monastery. But when I came back, I said, do I seem any different? And some people just spontaneously said, you've changed so much. I can't believe who you are now. So that gives me confidence in my practice in general, but especially in my practice of speech. It gives me confidence that I can do repair, which is sort of a concept that was absent in my family. It was the way I felt growing up, whether they intended that for me or not, was if I ever made a mistake, then I had to jump off a cliff. And so I found different ways to do that weren't helpful for anybody. The sixth factor of enlightenment is concentration. So in my effort to be continuously mindful, not only because of speech, but a whole lot of other things, but being able to place the attention, not just in meditation, but in every moment. This Katagiri had a phrase in one of my recent readings of his, where he said, now is eternal. And it's really the only thing that is eternal is right now. So the ability to use that now to practice in a very conscious way and absorb that and have the courage as well as the intention to do that is probably the one of the hardest things I have to do. Somebody just said yesterday, where we've got a bunch of people here having a great time doing work weekend with us, that the human mind on average changes its attention every 7 seconds. So I don't know how many times that is during the day, but it's a lot. And then finally, I talked about equanimity. Equanimity, as they said on the net, is not tranquility, but rather it's a balanced mind. It's the mind that is unswayed by desire and aversion, even as we mindfully are aware that desire and aversion are rising. And we're able to, Buddha-like, kind of weigh the feelings with a certain amount of reason and exercise sound judgment. So a phrase I will use with myself is sit down in the boat. And that comes from Thich Nhat Hanh and a story of being on the high seas with all kinds of Vietnamese people who were escaping a land that was no longer safe for them, and sometimes confronting pirates on the sea. So it was extremely dangerous. And to be the person that, despite the dangers, is able to sit down in the boat, simply because that's just the reality right there. But that takes a lot of strength and practice. So that's a lot to practice. And in some ways, it's been a real boon and can be a boon for all of us, because whether we're speaking or whether we're thinking, we're using words. And consequently, it's almost as good as breathing as a focus, because we almost always have words happening in our conscious moments. Now, one of the things I'm aware of is that I have a certain amount of anxiety right now, and so my words are coming continuously. I'm not pausing and taking a breath, and that's partly because of the fear, but that is also one of the hardest practices in my life I have to do, is not kind of go unconscious. It's very hard when I'm scared and speaking, or I may be overboard joyful or carried away with how cute and funny I am, or something like that could be going on. And when that happens, I literally am not conscious. I mean, I kind of have to be, but I'm not really keeping track at all of what I'm saying. And any resolve I have no ability to be aware of. So just this past week or so, a friend of mine that has been going through the process of a transgender change was deeply hurt, because they have a set of pronouns that they relate to. And we have a close and loving relationship. And when I'm unconsciously speaking, they suffer greatly when I don't use the right pronoun. And that is, I just realized, because this is something I've been working on and I haven't succeeded. And they shared with me their pain about how especially painful it is, because we have a close relationship, that I still, after multiple years, slip And there's a part of me inside that wants to say, well, I'm just human, I'm not perfect. But as I hear that pain, then it makes it possible for me to realize, I've been a little too casual about this. I need to be extra diligent and really work harder than I want to work with my speech, to make sure that I don't basically bruise that person in a very vulnerable state. So these are some of the ways that I can personally share about how I work with my speech. I want to share just a little bit from Marshall Rosenberg's work, because it's been so embraced, it's so available, and it helps us with something that we desperately need and really understand that we desperately need when we try to execute nonviolent communication. He says, well, first of all, in the introduction to this is the second edition of the book. There's lots of editions of it. There's lots of materials, and it now has a third edition. And the foreword is by a different person. But in the version I started with, Gandhi's grandson came to stay with him after growing up for 13 years in South Africa. He was having so much anger and so much misbehavior that his parents asked his grandfather, Mahatma Gandhi, if he would please work with him. So he went to live with his grandfather for a while. And the first thing his grandfather said was, to understand violence, we need to essentially do the first noble truth with speech, really become experienced about it. So every day for months, at least 3, I think it may have been longer than that, his grandfather asked him to, and worked with him in a room that had walls where he was to write down everything about what he had witnessed in terms of passive and physical violence. And passive violence includes verbal violence, but it's not something that's physically acted out. And he quickly accumulated an entire wall of observations and of primarily passive violence. And what his grandfather pointed out to him was that passive violence is particularly insidious, because what it does is it stimulates anger and violence in the victim, the person that's receiving this passive violence. And Joanne O'Neill, a teacher at Compassionate Ocean in the Twin Cities and an heir of Katagiri Roshi's, has a wonderful exercise where she'll ask us in a class on speech, she asked us, how many of you, raise your hands, have had a memorable experience of physical harm that still stays with you? You have a deep memory. And, maybe most people have some memory of violence, and she then asked us to see if we could remember one or more experiences of deeply hurtful speech, where somebody had said something to us that was life-changing or particularly problematic. And then she asked us to compare how potent, is it a 0 on a scale of 0 to 10, which is more painful, which is a more frequent experience in your lifetime. And 100% of the class was clear that the harm they remembered from speech was far more vivid and far more memorable than what they remembered of physical harm. So this is something that really motivate Marshall. He always uses his middle initial, Marshall B. Rosenberg, and working with nonviolent communication. And essentially, both Gandhi's grandson in his forehead in his foreword, as well as his grandson in this book said, in order for us to have peace, in order for us to get what we really want, we must find a way to cut off the fuel of violence. And because passive violence is frequently verbal, essentially, he said, we can achieve temporary peace sometimes in some parts of our life. But we really have to become that change, not wait for others to change. So a very powerfully and especially aligned with exactly what the Buddha said. The Buddha, of course, is famous for his statement that anger by anger never ceases, but by love alone is healed. So what Marshall focuses on is how can we speak our minds and give ourselves permission to feel what we feel and still act in a nonviolent and compassionate way. So that's what his whole teaching is about. And with respect to speech, he kind of lays out some basics. We're getting close to stopping time. He lays out some basics where he says, really, we have two things we can do when it comes to speech, and that's express honestly or receive empathically. As long as we are relating to another person as different from me, and subject to the term I use for myself is enemy thinking. So if I start having resentment arise, or there are sometimes people I just take an instant, aversion to. May not be hateful, but I already have a story going. That as long as that's going on, that handicaps us. And so we really need to practice as much as we possibly can. And when you hear an example from Marshall's experience, which I'm going to share with you, some of you may know this speech well, but he found himself in a foreign country that was not popular, was definitely involved with the USA, but he said, let's see, he describes it this way. On the way into a refugee camp, I had seen several empty tear gas canisters that had been shot into the camp the night before. Clearly marked on each canister were the words "Made in USA." I knew that the refugees harbored a lot of anger towards the US for supplying tear gas and other weapons to Israel. And he was speaking to a crowd of people. And in the crowd, there was a man that shouted out to me and called me murderer. And this is the conversation back and forth between the two, a sample of it. Marshall said, "Are you angry because you would like my government to use its resources differently?" The man responded, "Damn right I'm angry. You think we need tear gas. We need sewers, not tear gas. We need housing. We need to have our own country." Marshall, So you're furious and would appreciate some support in improving your living conditions and gaining political independence. Do you know what it's like to live here for 27 years the way I have with my family, children, and all? Have you got the faintest idea what that's been like for us? Sounds like you're feeling very desperate and you're wondering whether I or anybody else can really understand what it's like to be living under these conditions. Am I hearing you right? You want to understand? Tell me, do you have children? Do they go to school? Do they have playgrounds? My son is sick. He plays in open sewage. His classroom has no books. Have you seen a school that has no books? Marshall, I hear how painful it is for you to raise your children here. You'd like me to know that what you want is what all parents want for their children: a good education, opportunity to play and grow in a healthy environment. That's right, the basics, human rights. Isn't that what you Americans call it? Why don't more of you come here and see what kind of human rights you're bringing here? Marshall, you'd like more Americans to be aware of the enormity of the suffering here and to look more deeply at the consequences of our political actions. And he stops in the description to say that they went on for 20 more minutes or so, and that by the end of the time they spent together, as he continued to speak, the man invited him home for dinner. So this is, when we read it, I found it inspiring. Most people do. He points out that the dialogue continued with him expressing that, with the man in the crowd expressing his pain, and with Marshall listening and for feelings and needs behind each statement, which is part of the way he has kind of organized for us to learn how to speak more compassionately and empathically. He said, I received his words not as attacks, but as gifts from a fellow human willing to share his soul and deep vulnerability with me. So this was a very alive conversation, but he didn't agree or disagree with the man. He simply listened and tried to hear and be present to the pain that was right there. So he was being Avalokiteshvara at that moment with this tool of nonviolent communication. I'd like to give you a little bit of an example of what it looks like when you start trying to learn how to speak like Marshall, because it's hard. Carl is in here, he's probably telling, oh, never mind. Okay, I'm back. So here's a conversation that Marshall coached somebody on in one of his workshops. It's between a husband and a wife. Husband, what good does it talking to you do? You never listen. Wife, are you feeling unhappy with me? Coaching from Marshall. When you say with me, you imply that his feelings are the result of what you did. I would prefer you to say, are you unhappy because you were needing, and then guess at what his needs were. He said, are you unhappy with me? It would put your attention on what's going on in him and decrease the likelihood of your taking the message personally. I don't know if that was clear, but let's keep going. So the woman says, trying again, but what would you say? Are you unhappy because you blank, blank, blank? Because you what? And Marshall says, get your clue from the content of your husband's message. What good does talking to you do? You never listen. What is he needing that he's not getting when he says that? So all of his efforts are about how to listen for what's really going on for that person in their heart and mind, not just listening to their words and not listening to all the things that you might be missing that you're needing at the same time. So she goes on, she tries again. Are you feeling unhappy because you feel like I don't understand you? And Marshall says, notice that you are focusing on what he's thinking and not what he's needing. I think you'll find people to be less threatening if you hear what they're needing rather than what they're thinking about you. Instead of hearing that he's unhappy because he thinks you don't listen, focus on what he's needing by saying, are you unhappy because you are needing? And she tries again. Are you feeling unhappy because you are needing to be heard? And Marshall says, that's what I had in mind. Does it make a difference for you to hear him this way? And the wife says, definitely, a big difference. I see what's going on for him without hearing that I have done anything wrong. So these are the kinds of things we're trying to work on in dialogues in this workshop that I'm teaching. And we're really a group that's trying together to practice what Marshall Rosenberg suggests that we focuses on. And he gives us a kind of sentence that's focused really on connecting. So often in our speech, if we ask ourselves the simple question, is my intent to connect? And it takes a mere day of watching ourselves in speech to be realizing that a lot of the time when we speak, it has nothing to do with connecting. So that's really helpful information when we're looking to connect. Anyway, you can read the book, but his 4 elements are first, listening for whether it's listening to your own heart or listening to another person or in saying something. We start with observation, which is usually a story and not an observation. So his clue there is listen or observe what a camera would observe. So there can be a lot happening that a camera can't see or report. And that is a grounding that doesn't have us go into stories. And then what we're looking for, I have a what's called a feelings and needs list that I'll show you in full color. So this is feelings over in the color section. And then the needs, which can also be what's important to me, what I value, which goes deeper. He says those things that are most at the bottom of what give us our feelings, either happy ones or sad ones, are things that are really fundamental to our survival and to flourishing in this life. So that's why they're a key element of listening and speaking. So we're listening for feelings, and feelings like I'm sad, I'm happy, but at a much more granular level. So most of us have, like 5 or 6 basic words like sad, mad, glad, that are our feelings. But when we widen our feelings vocabulary, then it helps us get to whether needs are being met or what's important to us is met. But even more important than that, what exactly is important to us getting. And we often find, like I did when I first started with NVC, I thought, really, the need is the same every time. I need to have you give me what I want. And I need you to know what it is that I want a lot of times. So there's a great deal of skill in being able to listen for feelings and needs. And then finally, there's the all-important request. And usually we are not making a request. We do not want to give people the option of saying no. I'm a person that probably has a terror of hearing no, and that keeps me from expressing myself at all. And that's not a solution either. So I hope this gives you a feel for how any place we jump in our life is a good one for learning and practicing, and maybe a little more awareness of how prevalent speech and thinking is and how we experience our day. It's 10:15, but I want to go through a very brief set of really concise wisdom from Byron Katie, who wrote the book Loving What Is. And she says, the truth is always what's happening, not the story about what should be happening. Who would you be without this particular thought? It's your thoughts, not the other person's behavior or actions, that's the problem. Because you haven't investigated your thoughts to see that they oppose reality. Because reality is different from your view or my view. We attach uninvestigated concepts that we believe are we attach to uninvestigated concepts that we believe are true. So think about politics, just for starters. How hard it is to view with equanimity somebody whose politics arouse our enmity. Notice when your thoughts argue with reality, should versus what is. Clarity is what is. Clarity is what we want, because wanting reality to be different is hopeless. Stress is arguing with what is. So these are really deep flashes of insight that can have a tremendous impact on our the way we see, the way we form our stories, and the options we have for behaving differently. That's my own experience anyway. Stay in your own business. There are three kinds, she says: yours, mine, and reality. I love that one. Meet your thoughts with understanding. Thoughts are harmless unless we believe them, i.e., attachment. Most of us believe, I am what my thoughts tell me. And that goes so deep, just really so deep. It's so easy to be unconscious of it. I don't let go of thoughts. I meet them with understanding, and they let go of me. Understanding becomes interesting the next time. Become aware of your stories. Stories are untested, uninvestigated theories that tell us who we are. Before I had inquiry, I had no way to stop this kind of thinking. So there's where that pivot from reaction to the response of investigation and observation comes in. Small stories breed bigger stories. Who would you be without your story? So I will thank you for your patient attention and open it to questions. Or comments. Hi, Kat.
Hello, Kyoku. I was wondering what work by Byakuren Katie you were reading from. Oh. Can you hear me now? Hello? Yes? Okay. Can you tell me which work from Byakuren Katie you were reading from?
I had the same experience. Leave the door open and maybe I can hear it that way.
Oh, do you need louder?
I got to turn my speaker on. Sorry.
It's all right. That was my problem too.
Okay. So Kat, would you repeat whatever it was you said?
I would like to know what work by Byakuren Katie you were reading from.
Oh, it's a book called, hold on, I got it here. Oh, I did have it here. Hold on. Darn it. Darn it, darn it. There we go. The book is Loving What Is.
Loving What Is.
She's a fascinating person and very lively. So
I know. Where did she come from? It's crazy that she figured out a lot of this by herself.
You know, I've read enough of her book because I haven't read the whole thing cover to cover.
Yeah.
To know that she was a deeply alcoholic,
Mm-hmm.
and basically kind of hit bottom in a very dramatic way. And it was during that experience that she had some kind of enlightenment. And as she was recovering within her family, she started developing an understanding that, she started with things like telling her sons to pick up their socks and complaining about it and nagging to them. And suddenly, because of this experience of recovering from alcoholism and the wisdom that came with it, she realized, okay, them not picking up their socks is reality, and kind of went from there.
Yes, she's just a fascinating person. I just wanted to, it's not so much a question, but you clarified something for me, because I also am a person who deals with a great deal of internal anxiety from, I liked your word, stories that I hold on to from my life. And I get in the story. And what I do is I speak in a constant stream, because I'm afraid if I stop and I don't explain things all the way out, that people will think less of me. And that, as you point out, does not have to do with connection. When I fall back on whatever intellect I have to sort of be my cover story, the cat in front, I fall into that kind of nervous babbling almost. And you're absolutely right, because every time I have an instant of that, I feel empty. I feel that what I really need in communicating with another person didn't happen. And I wasn't even aware of it until I started paying attention to it. That I feel let down by my end of the experience every time I do that. And so I'm going to carry your words with me. So thank you.
My pleasure. And actually practicing with that has become a great door to happiness. Because as soon as you recognize it, then you have a chance of experiencing your life differently. It's that powerful.
I believe you.
Kyoku, thank you very much. I'd like to add something, if I might. So I've always regarded the word stress as equaling the word change. And there are positive changes and negative changes, and that creates a stressful, what we consider to be a stressful situation. And when you said that Katie was a recovering alcoholic, and her words make, of course, to me, great sense. And they're similar to words which I'd like to read, just a quick paragraph, if it's all right, from what we call the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there is a story in which a recovering doctor says this, and acceptance is the answer to all my problems today. When I am disturbed, it is because I find some person, place, thing, or situation, some fact of my life unacceptable to me. I can find no serenity until I accept that person, place, thing, or situation as being exactly the way it is supposed to be at this moment.
Yes, I love that. There's two things that I'm hearing. One of them is even supposed is a story. Yeah. Is what part of what I'm learning is that, because that word just activates me. It's like I in my own work with Al-Anon realized that I was sort of the Statue of Liberty of indignation, that I was going to somehow have to take care of my life when somebody else should have had to take care of it. It's like, and fortunately, those groups are very good at working with exactly those kinds of problems, because you really get stuck there. You just totally get stuck there.
That is to me the epitome of what I've interpreted as the Buddha's teaching, that suffering is my attachment to people, places, things, and situations, the way I see them, the way you've reported, and certainly the way Katie mentions, and that my reluctance to accept impermanence, my attachment to permanence, is really so much of what I think you've been saying throughout this entire presentation, which I value very much, and thank you very much for it.
Thank you, Roger. One of the things that Marshall says that really stuck with me, it's a bold statement, but he said, if we are to learn how to compassionately communicate, we must totally give up trying to get what we want.
Yeah, right.
Which is just a kind of a restatement of what the appears in the Buddhist teachings.
Right. Thank you.
Pretty soon they're going to cut us off, so last chance. All right, I'm going to turn it over to our host, S.
Thank you so much, Kyoku. I have a few announcements for us here today. Next Sunday, the speaker will be Reverend Jushin Buter. You can see the full lineup of speakers for coming weeks on our website at hokyoji.org, and also see the past talks. You can join us next weekend for Caring for the Land. It goes Friday late afternoon to Sunday noon. The True Heart Women's Retreat is coming up in May, and that starts on May 5th and goes through May And finally, the Just Sitting Retreat is June 2nd through June 8th. All of these things you can find on our website, and we'd be happy to have you. Let's see. Your generosity sustains Hokyoji's facilities and programs. If you'd like to contribute to Hokyoji today, you can go into the chat. You'll find the link to that. And let's see, I think that's about it. We'll do the final, do the vows together. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Thank you all for coming. Hope to see you next week.